And so, newspapers at their height. Company I actually worked for a while called Gannett, was a leading newspaper publisher, is a leading newspaper publisher, and a former chairman of Gannett by the name of Al Newhart had the concept of trying to have a national newspaper. Okay, if ABC and CBS networks could be national, magazines, Life magazine and Time magazine could be national and be sold and reach people all over the country. Why couldn't a newspaper? So he pulled this off with Gannett, and this was launched in 1982. Today is still one of the largest circulation newspapers in the country, with a circulation, I think, of 2 or 3 million. It was also an attempt to revive newspapers, because even though the internet hadn't really happened yet, there was still fewer and fewer people willing to read things. Now we come right up to more or less today with where newspapers are, and I already talked about reporters being cut and the importance of investigative journalism. I think you know who the guy on the right is, the founder of Amazon. And as I'm sure many of you know, he also bought the Washington Post, another very, very distinguished newspaper, Pulitzer Prize winner many, many times. This is the paper that published all the Watergate news, for example, and it dwells right in our nation's capital, so it's very important it's well read by politicians and those who are involved with government. And so, while many newspapers are having to cut lots of reporters and cut other expenses, and some of them close, go online only, not have a paper version, there are a few people out there, like Jeff Bezos, who are buying newspapers and saving them, so to speak, and helping to create and pay for ads like the one you saw a minute ago, Freedom Dies in Darkness. And what kind of content do we get from newspapers? We all know that. Magazines, launched in Europe, many of them in color, also in the 19th century. So it's called storehouse. That's where the word comes from in Arabic. Because in a magazine, there are all kinds of bits and pieces and articles and pictures and all kinds of different content. Of course, most magazines, particularly these days, focus on a certain kind of editorial content. They focus around certain interests. But in the old days, there were general interest magazines. It's just, you're not reading today's news in it, but you're reading thought pieces and travelogues and pictures. And these had national scope, and national advertisers were in them. Here's one. Do you know who the artist is here? Of course, you can read it on the piece. This is Norman Rockwell. Some of you may have heard of. This is another famous and successful national magazine for many years. Doesn't exist anymore. The Saturday Evening Post. So at one point, Life magazine and the Saturday Evening Post came out. I think it was every week. I think, yeah. And you look forward to getting it because they were big and glossy and had beautiful photographs and just interesting articles about all kinds of things from around the world. It's almost like getting an encyclopedia or something, small one with kind of new, fresh thoughts and things in it. But again, these days, magazines are getting more and more focused in terms of content, and there are still successful, even printed magazines, many of them about specific interests like this, or like yachting or motorcycles, or there's another one called Inked, I-N-K-E-D. I'm sure you can imagine what that's about. And they tend to have readers who are very, very loyal to the content and to the publication and to the brand of the magazine. And so someone advertising in there, or someone who's written about by the editors because of a good PR program, can get a lot of mileage still out of a printed magazine. And of course, all the magazines have websites. This is New York Magazine's, one of their websites. And it's a well-read, successful website from everything I know. So we've talked about out-of-home. We've talked about what's called print, which are newspapers and magazines, and also direct mail, other things that are come out on paper. Now we're up to radio. And from its invention, some say by Marconi, others say by Tesla. I tend to believe Tesla just because he seems to always have been the underdog in his lifetime. Brilliant, genius person. I encourage you guys to look him up and read about him. And, of course, you know, a pretty famous car is named after him, Nikola Tesla. But radios were invented, and at first people were just sort of doing ham radio things, and maybe broadcasting or listening to some things. And then programming was developed. One of the leaders in this case was a guy named William Paley, Bill Paley, who founded CBS Radio Network and then CBS TV Network. It was another, someone considered to be kind of a genius in the business. So it really got to the point where radios got bigger and the sound got better, and every living room in America, pretty much, could afford it, had a radio there, where today there's a TV. And the family would gather around in the evening after dinner and listen to radio shows during prime time. And the shows were very groundbreaking. I mean, they were sitcoms and detective stories, musical shows, variety shows with singers and music and jokes, and mostly sponsored, like by one sponsor. And that's the brilliant thing that Paley did. So he started these networks, CBS Network, by working with local stations in all the major cities, convincing them to run his programming at a certain time of day in the evening, in exchange for allowing Paley to sell a bunch of the ads on the program that ran during the program. The local station could also sell some of its own ads. So here's a little overview of history. See, I'm getting my revenge on Marconi here for some reason. General Electric, which some of you may know was begun by Thomas Edison. He bought Marconi and dubs it Radio Corporation of America, otherwise known as RCA. RCA broadcasts a fight, a heavyweight boxing fight. Another company called Westinghouse has some stations in some major cities. AT&T also gets into radio. AT&T obviously is American Telephone and Telegraph, which is Alexander Graham Bell's gift to the world, the telegraph, or excuse me, the telephone. So there's some names that are still around here. AT&T is still around, folks. Gone through a lot of changes, still around and getting back into programming. Anyway, so in 1926, General Electric, Westinghouse, and Radio Corporation of America buy out AT&T and launch the National Broadcasting Network. And then this guy, Arthur Judson, starts one, and then it's purchased by William Paley, who we talked about, for $400,000, becomes CBS. Paley offers free programming to stations in exchange for blocks of commercial time. Brilliant. By 1938, CBS Network has 122 stations in local markets. There's the Tesla, by the way. Tesla invented the basic engine of the Tesla automobile, the electronic engine, FYI. So I'm going to play you an old radio show, I think, for the rest of this little segment, and then we'll stop it. But the gentleman on the right is Orson Welles. He's in his early 20s. I think he may be 21 or so here. In his way, he also was a genius. And he broadcast on a network in 1938 a very infamous program called War of the Worlds. And I want you to get a feeling for the content and the programming of some of these old things. And so we're going to take a little listen to a little bit of War of the Worlds. I may jump around a bit. Oh, one of these pesky ads. I wish they'd stop. Who needs ads, right, class? Okay. Now let's expand it here. So let me. Okay. See, this is about an hour long, so we don't want to get too crazy. Okay. I think you guys get the idea there. You scared a lot of people. People tuned in and didn't realize it was entertainment, thought it was news. It's one of the early cases of mistaking entertainment for news, and then what can happen if you do. Got another station here. I'm not going to play that. I'm going to give you guys a break. But on the topic of radio, podcasts are radio. It's a little sexier name for a radio show. But the definition of radio is anything that's all sound with no visual, any kind of programming or content. And so Sirius radio is radio, and so are podcasts. And as you may know, you can buy ads on podcasts. So radio really, here we go, was replaced by TV in terms of it being a national medium. But radio became local and survived. And I can tell you that because I used to listen to KXOK when I lived in St. Louis on my transistor radio, and I heard the Beatles and all the other groups on that. And today radio is podcast and Sirius.